All right, I think we'll get started. Thank you all for joining. My name is James Fletcher. I work at Evans and Partners as an advisor. I've had a keen interest in the biotech world for quite a few years, and I'm pleased to introduce to these two companies today, Pharmost and Rhinomed. I will emphasize also any advice on this call is general in nature and can't be used, shouldn't be used for personal uses. So starting off with Roger Aston from Pharmost. Roger has many decades of experience in the biotech world with Main Pharma, Resap Health, Oncosil, and Immuron, and also Pharmost, the executive chairman of Pharmost. Pharmost is a clinical stage company developing targeted cancer therapeutics for humans and animals. And I would like to pass you over to Roger. Please take it away.
Thanks very much for that introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for attending the Pharmost presentation. I should say also thank you to Rudy and the team, and probably FB Rice as well, because we had a bit of trouble linking me up. So Pharmost is a listed ASX company focused on repurposing drugs, basically taking approved drugs and identifying new clinical applications for them. If we go to the first slide, Verity, thank you. There's probably many companies now working on repurposing. We chose to repurpose Monopanto for probably three main reasons. Firstly, we've discovered and patented the fact that Monopanto can extend survival of dogs with aggressive tumors, so they basically live longer. Secondly, unlike chemotherapies, our toxicology is excellent. I mean, we get very little adverse events, and we'll come to that again. And thirdly, I would say that Monopanto does not obliterate the immune system, as of course most chemotherapies do, and they obliterate the bits of the immune system you don't want to obliterate, because it's those are the B and T cells which are priming to help you fight the tumor. Anyway, we'll come back to some of that if time permits. The drug itself, Monopanto, is registered in 38 countries as a veterinary antiparasitic. We've taken this and we reformulated Monopanto as a tablet. I mean, a lot of people think this takes 10 minutes, but it took us 18 months to do that. And we've been testing it in canines and humans over the years. The humans were tested with the raw active API that's used in the sheep drench for parasites. Pharmost has also completed 4 canine trials and 1 human trial in Adelaide. We're moving into phase 3 registration trial with the canine cancer product, and that phase 3 trial will start in April, possibly May next year, so in a few months' time. Why is it taking so long? Well, because we have to put the material on stability. This is a registration trial. Discussions have been initiated with pharmaceutical companies, and we're exploring at the moment what role such companies might want to play, whether they come in early before we complete the phase 3 trial, and then it's one type of deal there, or do they want to de-risk further and would like us to do the phase 3 trial, in which case the deal goes up in value. We've got canine results, which are an excellent springboard for the human diseases, and I'll explain that a little bit later. And we've got 3 human trials to be started in calendar year 22. Cancer, of course, because we've demonstrated good results in dogs, which are a good mimic for human. And then we've got MND, motor neuron disease, and COVID. And you may well wonder how we can treat so many human diseases. And that relates to the mechanism of action, which I've got a little slide on that. The MND trial has been reviewed, peer reviewed, and we received $880,000 from Fight MND, which is the largest MND charity in Australia, as far as I know. Next slide, please, Verity. Like owner, like dog, it's a bit of an old joke that we will start to look like our pets after a while, but unfortunately the similarities also extend to cancer. So dogs will get mammary, prostate, lung, and so on, and as such are an excellent reflection of what we could expect in humans. If we get the same results in humans as we got in dogs, we will be extremely pleased. And in support of what I'm just saying, you can look at the current dog products. They're all human products which have been modified in dose for smaller animals, namely dogs. So the big picture at the moment is we want a corporate outcome for the veterinary applications in 2022. We want to undertake a phase 2 clinical trial in man with MPL, which is our least risky avenue. And we want to evaluate the proposition for MPL in both COVID and motor neuron disease, which are going to be running in parallel. So we're going to try to run everything in parallel as we move forward. Next slide. You may well ask, how can Monopanto, a small drug, cure parasites in sheep as well as treat a number of diseases? Well, the answer to that is relatively easy because it's an approved drug. We know the mechanism. It binds to acetylcholine receptors on the parasites and kills or paralyzes them and kills them and frees the sheep of the parasite. This is all described at vast length in the public release summary, which is noted on your screen, plus the link. It's the TGA's overview of safety and efficacy. The reason we can use it for other diseases is that we have discovered and patented that Monopanto acts through the mTOR pathway, which is the mechanistic target of rapamycin. Products in this class are already making $2.5 billion in sales, rapamycin and everolimus. The difference between ours and those are that we do not have the toxicology of rapamycin. In other words, we do not suppress the immune system. mTOR plays a pivotal role in governing cell growth and proliferation, so it kind of makes sense to use it in cancer, which is a proliferative disease, motor neuron disease, where you've got overactivation of protein synthesis, and of course, COVID-19, where the virus needs to harness the machinery inside the cell. If you can shut down that machinery, then COVID will struggle to replicate. Next slide, please. So where are we in commerciality terms? Well, there's really two options for dog owners, and I'm giving you this because this is the closest to market. They can go for chemotherapy, and for $5,000 to $10,000 for a CHOP treatment, you get 6 to 12 months typically survival. And it's given as 4 or 5 cycles of treatment. And you can see the list of quality of life problems that owners have, which is why only 15 to 20% of canine cancers are treated. So the price tag and the side effects are impediments. The other end of the spectrum, where you get 60 to 80% of the owners of dogs, they will basically just put the dog down on diagnosis, or in cases they'll be put onto prednisolone, which is an anti-inflammatory palliative, and they will take the dog away and maybe come back in 2 or 3 weeks' time and then have the dog put down. You know, there's a lot of emotion and sentimentality with dogs, so you know, people want to sort of say their goodbyes. We've taken Monopanto with prednisolone, and we have no short-term side effects, unlike the other two approaches. We have excellent quality of life. We haven't done a formal QOL study, but the feedback from owners is tremendous. We've doubled the life expectancy versus prednisolone only, which is excellent. No risk of contamination from chemo. If you have treated your animal or if the vet has treated your animal with chemotherapy, you have to have a withholding period so that it doesn't contaminate the kids at home. No ethical issues from chemo, and it's homeowner administration. Cost I've left blank because it's going to be much less than chemotherapy. And we're targeting a 60 to 80% canine target. If we can go to the next slide. So this little fellow just highlights where we're drawing onto the customer base. The chemotherapy customer base for the US market is about 300 million. And we expect globally it'll be about 500 or 600 million. And that's for 15 to 20% of the dogs. If you can get hold of 60 to 80% of the dogs, as you can see at the bottom for the euthanasia, and feed them into our palliative care strategy, then we think this is going to be a very attractive market. Next slide, please. So what are we doing? We're fine-tuning the dose optimization in phase 2 as we are moving towards April, May for the start of the phase 3. Canines treated showing at least stable disease. So we get stable disease in almost every dog that we treat. Obviously, you do get dogs occasionally which have tumors in places where they really reduce the life expectancy, like humans, of course. We can quadruple the mean survival time over untreated dogs, so that it's not a big expense to get a bit of runway for your dog. Conservatively, we're doubling the mean survival time over prednisolone alone. Dogs are in good shape. We've opened up the process for discussing with FDA a registration strategy, and we're also training up for GCP implementation. And we've started, as I said earlier, exploratory discussions with major pharma for sale or license of the product. Next slide, please. I'm not going to dwell on this. We have two manufacturers working in synergy, and the bulk of the work is going to move to Syngene in India as we move forward, as they're fully FDA approved globally. And they're up at the 2 × 10 kilogram scale at the moment, and they will do our tableting as well. Catalan were excellent in helping us formulate the excipients to come up with a suitable tablet, which we're grateful for. Next slide. So here we are. We've got our cancer program, both in dogs and in humans. And for the human one at the top there, you can see that we've got principal investigators who have offered to act as principal investigators for a phase 1/2 trial in Europe. For motor neuron disease, we've got Dr. Susan Mathers at the Calvary Healthcare in Bethlehem and Professor Dominic Rowe at Macquarie University to act as lead investigators on the motor neuron disease. These are the people who have reviewed our data and decided that this merits the grant and undertaking the trial. And right at the bottom there, you've got what I would call the transformational bet, in that we have Walter and Liza Hall, 360 Bio and Leiden University all show that Monopanto, when used in cultured cells, inhibits the proliferation of the SARS virus. So if it turns out to be the same with whole humans, we will be extremely delighted. And to that effect, we've had interest from 6 centers to explore the value of Monopanto in this regard. Next slide, if there is one. Okay, this is my last slide. VET, I won't dwell on. I've covered that off in quite a bit of detail. Seeking corporate outcome in calendar year 2022, either early or late. We don't know because it affects how much the partner will contribute financially. Human trial is going to be Q2, Q3, calendar year 22. Other diseases, similarly, we're going to try to run them in parallel, but it's management a challenge, really. And finally, I'd just like to flag, we haven't taken an easy tumor to do all this work, and we've taken B-cell lymphoma, which is one of the most prevalent canine cancers and one of the most aggressive. So we feel that some of the easier cancers may even give us better results. Thank you very much. If there's no more slides. Yeah, disclaimer.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that, Roger. I will remind everyone also, if you do have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A function at the bottom, or you can send me a chat directly if you like. I have a couple of questions from beforehand, Roger. And I think you may have covered this already. Do you intend to commit to a canine deal prior to commencing the upcoming COVID and motor neurons disease trials?
I did touch on it, and yes. I'd like to touch on it again, actually, because it's an important question. Everything has a value. You know, I can go out there and sell it for $10 tomorrow, or I can wait a year, and when I've got the phase 3 data, and sell it for 200 million. So you've got to have a negotiation. The first step in doing licenses such as this is that you establish a relationship with somebody within the company who believes that there's a commercial value, and then you work together. They may have want to make a contribution as to how to run the phase 3 trial from a product perspective. They'll want to discuss, do you blister pack one of your pills with a prednisolone? So there's a lot of legwork that needs to be done. So the simple answer is we're going to try to do it next year. It may come sooner. We've already had companies give us access to their dossiers, for the registered veterinary product. And we've also had companies give us tens of kilograms of drug to evaluate. So, you know, there is a process there which we're following. We don't want to sound desperate.
And can I also, with the motor neurons diseases, there is a lot of funding available for that sort of thing. If you had good indications on the initial trials, you'd expect further funding. Would that be correct?
I think so, is the answer. Yeah.
Are there any other questions from the audience? There was one other question, Roger, that came through. Do you have any marketing plans to increase visibility to the investment community, such as hot copper? Now, I'm not sure that whether you've used that sort of platform before.
We haven't used hot copper before. We do, of course, follow it. I think the answer to the question is yes. I think we're going to make a big push starting in 22, early next year, when everyone's back, to get the message out there. We've been fairly quiet over these, just doing these, but I think, as you can see from the program for next year, there's a lot going on and a lot of opportunity in Pharmos. Oh, you've got your microphone off, James.
There we are. Another question, what results did you see in the first human trial?
It was a safety trial, of course. It was done at the Royal Adelaide by Professor Michael Brown, and we basically showed that we get statistically significant suppression of tumor markers, S6K and BP1, basically. And so we know it's active, and we had a lot of challenges in that trial because we used the drench. We put the drench into capsules, and the patients took them, but often the capsules broke in the mouth or leaked in the mouth, and there was a pretty foul taste. Sheep don't complain, but humans complain enormously. So that's why we've created a tablet. But we took a lot of comfort. Number one, there were no serious adverse events in the other than the taste of the product. And two, we've shown markers in man being suppressed. So we're hopeful that when we move into the human trial, we'll be able to replicate that.
Excellent. Well, I think you've covered everything, Roger. That's the end of the questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, James.
And I will now pass over to Michael Johnston from Rhinomed. Michael has been the CEO of Rhinomed for almost 9 years, I believe.
Rhinomed, 2013. Yeah.
Right. Yes. So, and Rhinomed engages in the research, development, and commercialization of consumer and medical devices, and with commercializing nasal stents, stent delivery technologies, and quite excitingly, the Rhino Swab is possibly the sexiest product you have at the moment. Would that be accurate?
If you could call it sexy, yes, that is a nice. I'll take that. Yep.
I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just share this. Hopefully, everyone can see that. A bit about Rhinomed, obviously listed on the ASX and also on the OTC. Market cap, depending on what day you're looking at it, of around 70 mil. We're quite tightly held. That's all happened on market and through placements over the last 9 years. Our largest shareholder is a guy called Whitney George, who's a chief investment officer of Sprott, big US-based fund. Pleasingly, Professor John McBain, who's our second largest shareholder, one of the pioneers of IVF in Australia, also one of the founding investors of Afterpay, joined our board earlier this year, which is great. And we're chaired by Ron Dewhurst, who, if you've ever been in the banking or investment banking world, you know him well because he was head up Legg Mason at JP Morgan out of New York for a fair period of time. We've got about 60 patents now, over 57 design patents that cover our technology and what we do with it. In terms of the products we've got on market, as you can see here, we've got Mute product, which is the actually #1 nasal snoring dilator in the US now, Turbine, which is a niche sport product. And then we have two vapor or volatile drug delivery products, one targeting sleep and one targeting nasal congestion. And those are the products that we're still working on a program in cannabis to include CBD in particular into those products. And excitingly, we're also basically sell through all the leading pharmacies globally, Boots in the UK, CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid, as you can see there, and throughout Australia. So in terms of revenues, we had solid growth throughout from the last financial year, FY20 to FY21. But, and that was really due to the focus we placed on snoring in particular during the lockdowns globally. Obviously, if people are locked up, snoring is going to get on their nerves. And we saw a really great response, as I mentioned, #1 nasal dilator in the US, and really solid growth into the first quarter of this year with, and over the last 52 weeks, especially through online, which offset the significant fall in foot traffic that occurred globally through pharmacies. Pleasingly, as you can see in this slide, sales orders, which really reflect not just the existing underlying business, but also the new Rhino Swab, are already exceeding the entire last financial year, which is great. So on to the Rhino Swab program, as James said, the sexy part of our business at present. If you've all been familiar with having been nasal swabbed, you know it's not too pleasant. But actually, the nasal swab itself hasn't changed for decades, and it's got some significant issues. It's not pleasant, so it causes testing reluctance. It's random the way it does it. If you've had a number of swabs, you'll know that they're probably all being done differently. There's great variance in terms of the amount of sample that ends up on the swab, where it's collected from. So there's a whole lot of issues there that impact not just the user experience, but also more importantly, the clinical outcome. So what have we done? We've resolved it. So if you can see on me on my screen, I have one of these and I can stick it in my nose and I can keep talking. In fact, I'll wear it the entire presentation just to demonstrate how comfortable and easy it is. This is a particular issue, of course, for kids. If you approach a child with one of these little babies, one of the standard traditional swabs, they get particularly upset, as do their parents. In fact, parents are reluctant to bring their kids forward for testing, according to the Royal Children's Hospital study, because of the fear, anxiety, and stress associated with nasal swabs. We've resolved that with a simple insight that we recognize that kids put things up their noses all the time. So what we need to do is not just produce a product that would actually operate in a superior fashion within a clinical setting, but actually convince the kids to do it themselves. And that's what you see here is a range of swabs that kids are happy to wear themselves. We've got a trial going with the MCRI here in Melbourne and Royal Children's Hospital that will really validate the clinical outcomes, but we already know that it's reducing the fear and anxiety that kids have in regards to nasal swabs. The program is backed up by some pretty comprehensive data and clinical and user studies that we've undertaken, starting with the VIDRL, with the Victorian Infectious Diseases Reference Lab at the Doherty, all the way through to two trials going underway, one at the Royal Children's, as I mentioned, and another one at St Vincent's, which is going to look at how we perform against saliva, which is reasonably popular just in this part of the world, not really necessarily anywhere else. In terms of the Rhino Swab itself, obviously, it's got a greater surface area, it gets a bigger sample. It's registered already in the FDA with the TGA. It's got a CE mark, so we can sell globally. It works with both molecular and antigen tests, and I'll come back to that. We've already secured our first orders with both New South Wales and Victorian governments. It's got some really important propositions to the path labs in the sense that it lowers the labour cost, lowers the PPE requirements, and protects healthcare workers as well, because of course it can be administered by, self-administered anywhere, anytime. And importantly, there's no pain, which is really critically important. As I mentioned, it works equally as well and integrates seamlessly with both molecular PCR lab systems and, of course, the point-of-care rapid antigen tests, and I'll come back to that. As you'd be aware, obviously, there's been a stack of testing going on globally. And more importantly, the use cases are expanding. Originally, it was just hospitals and healthcare centres. It's moved into government testing centres. And now what we're seeing, especially with rapid antigen testing, is the move into places of employment and ultimately home use, which is critically important. And those use cases are the ones where the user experience in particular is going to be critically important. What does testing look like going forward? Obviously, with the high vaccine rates, we look to see where the future will lie. Interestingly enough, Harvard University have put in place a testing, I suppose, cadence and protocol, which we really think is probably the gold standard going forward. It's a high vaccination environment, Nonetheless, they still insist on testing once a week for all faculty and staff and students, and twice a week if you're unvaccinated. So we certainly think in high risk or high value environments, such as, power, any infrastructure sort of environments, the testing will certainly be an ongoing part of life going forward, sadly. As I mentioned, we're really focused on two key areas: the PCR or pathology lab testing space and the rapid antigen testing kits. As I mentioned, we've already secured orders for both New South Wales and Victoria, which is great. And we've got a lot of short and medium-term opportunities. We've got a significant pipeline of opportunity. And then when we look at rapid antigen tests, we're heavily engaged and in dialogue with a number of rapid antigen test kit companies who are seeking to integrate not just the Rhino Swab, but also, to pull this one out and put the Rhino Swab Junior in, this little doozy, into rapid antigen test kit, especially for children aged 5 to 12. Obviously, at the moment, they're unable to be vaccinated, although hopefully that will change shortly. But certainly they're an important test group to test, and we have the swab that will allow that to occur. Just to sort of close off, I'll just cover off a couple of use cases. One of the studies we did at CWZ in the Netherlands indicated that one healthcare worker could test 10 people simultaneously, gather a sample, which makes a significant difference to the time and the queues, etc. And of course, as it's integrated out, or rolled out into different testing environments, it can be integrated into things like airports, opening, and any queues such as sporting events and so on. Finally, in terms of production, we have a small facility based here in Melbourne, Australia, which we're currently producing swabs out of. We're actually just bringing online a facility in China, which we currently make our consumer health products in, that is starting to roll out with the Rhino Swabs and the Rhino Swab Juniors. And we're also scoping out 2 sites, one in the UK and one in the US, which should significantly allow us to respond to demand globally without the crunch that we're seeing in global supply chains, which is exciting. So a couple of catalysts going forward. Obviously, we're continuing to see the rebound in our consumer health business. We're driving growth online, responding to the way the consumer behaviour has changed as a result of the pandemic. Significant pipeline of opportunity, and that's certainly the short-term news flow that you can keep an eye out for, both within the PCR lab space and, more importantly, the rapid antigen test kits. Revenues 1.7 record for the first quarter. Sales order book already exceeds the entire last financial year, and we're seeing some really interesting conversations with medical device diagnostic companies as we grow the business. And on that point, I'll grab a breath, stick my swab back in, which I can easily do, and take questions.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. Very comprehensive. There was one question beforehand, which I think you covered. Any plans for swabs to have immediate testing?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, we're seeing a number of different opportunities, and this testing market is not homogenous. For instance, we've got this swab here, which has got a QR code on it that allows us to resolve things around custody, chain of custody issues. But ultimately, and one of the things that we're going to be looking at is integrating this swab with this test. So this is a simple lateral flow test, the ability to take this base technology and integrate it into the swab. So in the case I put my swab in my nose and pull it out and it will change color, is ultimately where we see this technology going, and a real opportunity down the track. As you'd be aware, the key issue going forward into next year will be that we haven't had a flu season for 2 years. And people want to know immediately, have I got COVID? Have I got RSV? Have I got flu? And what do I do about that? If I've got flu, I can be treated. So we see a real opportunity to start to integrate our swab into the existing rapid antigen testing environment, and really expand our business, not just with partnerships, but also through our existing pharmacy network, of course, which is global.
Excellent. Are there any other questions out there? I haven't seen any come up. I'll follow on with another one if I may, Michael. In terms of competing products around the world and emerging competing products, do you see anything? What does the landscape look like?
Sure. So with the swab, the standard Copan or Puritan swab, and then the Chinese versions of these predominate the market. One of the things that we set up front was setting our price against those products. However, of course, with the excess production, they're now lowering their price significantly. The pleasing thing we see is that the labour advantages, the key benefits we have around efficiencies, allows us to maintain a price of about $1 US per swab, and that's important. But in terms of other products on the market that are similar, that are trying to do a similar sort of thing, at this stage, we have yet to see anybody who's really been able to leverage the experience we have in terms of designing something that goes inside the nose and can be worn comfortably.
Excellent. There was a question just asking about your, I know you're full-time as the CEO there. Do you have other, does Cogentum fit in with that as well?
No. That Cogentum was a consulting firm I used to work with or work for about a decade ago, but that's sort of defunct now. So I'm full-time on Rhinomed and have been for some time.
Which you have been for, coming up to 9 years. So
9 years, longer than I ever thought, but it's actually more exciting than it's ever been.
Yes. Another question, is it biodegradable, or is there a plan to explore to reduce the medical waste at all?
It's a great question, and something that we are very mindful of. We are very much, we're restricted by, I guess, what the regulator will allow in terms of materials that can go inside the nose. We do use, where possible, we will source recyclable materials, but because it is medical material, unfortunately, it does fall into that medical waste issue. But where possible, we do try to identify and work with suppliers, material suppliers, to identify material that both fulfills the requirement of the regulator in terms of human compatibility, but also is at least recyclable. Biodegradability is a bit more difficult. Right.
Another question came through about the color changing swab. How far away do you think that is?
That's probably, that's a fair way away. I'd say it's over the next 24 months. And the reason being is we've got to, whilst the technology element is reasonably, and I should say you use that in a sort of a considered form, but is fairly straightforward. The clinical requirements, the clinical trial requirements and the regulatory requirements will be quite onerous, because it takes it from being a class 1 device, which is what the swab is at the moment, into a class 2 and even potentially class 3 device. However, one of the interesting things about it, and this sort of goes to Roger's earlier comments about prophylactics or drugs that actually treat COVID, is that a swab is in effect a brush. And that's what it's doing. It's going into the nose and brushing and collecting material. The other way of looking at this device is as a drug delivery device, where you actually load the brush with a material and you deposit it inside the nose. One of the interesting things that we are working on is actually looking at this device and our platform as a drug delivery platform, because what I'm able to do now is in effect microdose or dose over a long period of time the nasal airway. And of course, as most people will be familiar, the virus actually targets and enters through the nose, and particularly the ACE2 receptors, of which the vast majority are actually in the nose. So there's a real opportunity for us to start to look for partnering opportunities with companies who are targeting upper respiratory disease and are wanting that sort of local delivery.
Excellent. Are there any other questions out there? I can't see any more coming through. I think you've done a very comprehensive job there, Michael. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So if there are no other questions, we will look to wrap this up. I would like to thank Roger and thank Michael for their presentations, very comprehensive. Special thanks to FB Rice for putting on this the presentation, and to Monsoon Communications. Fabulous job. If there's nothing else there, we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much.